I found out my husband was on a dating app claiming he was a single dad open to new relationships. My marriage looked boring from the outside, which is honestly what I thought I wanted, because boring looked a lot safer than the chaos I grew up in. My name is Lainey. I live in a mid-sized city in the middle of the country. I work in a small medical office answering phones and rescheduling people who forgot they even had an appointment, and if you had looked at my life a while ago, you would probably have said it looked normal. I had a husband who kissed me on the forehead before work, a little boy who liked to fall asleep on my chest while we watched cartoons, a car that usually started, rent that was mostly on time, and a calendar full of school events and boring meetings. Nothing about my life screamed drama. Nothing about it prepared me for the moment I realized my husband was out there on a social media app pretending I did not exist. It started in the most ridiculous way, which is kind of how my life tends to go. I was trying to upload some pictures of our son to one of those shared family albums because my mother had been nagging me for days, and my phone storage was full, again, so I grabbed my husband's tablet instead. He uses it mostly to watch videos and scroll through nonsense, and I had used it before, so I did not think twice. I opened the photo folder, and because the universe has a dark sense of humor, a notification slid down from the top of the screen right then. It was from a social media app I did not even know he had installed, and it said something like, "Someone commented on your video," with a bunch of hearts and fire emojis. I could have ignored it. I probably should have ignored it. Instead, I tapped it, because apparently I like pain. The app opened straight into his profile, and for a second my brain did not even process what I was looking at. There was my husband's face in the profile picture, same stupid crooked smile, same faded baseball cap he refuses to throw away. But the name under it was not his full name, just a shortened version, and the bio made my stomach flip. Single dad, starting over, figuring it out one day at a time. No mention of a wife, no mention of a marriage, no wedding band in the photos. Just him and our son, and some carefully curated shots of him looking very available. I started scrolling, and the more I scrolled, the more my chest tightened. There were videos of him at the park with our son, except the captions were all about how hard it is to do it alone, how he never thought he would be raising a kid by himself, how tough it is to co-parent with someone who does not respect boundaries. There were selfies of him at the gym, which was wild because he had told me he did not have time to work out anymore. There were clips of him in the car singing along to songs he would never admit he liked, with text overlays about healing, about new beginnings, about finally choosing himself. And then there were the comments. Women. So many women. Telling him what a good father he was, how strong he was for leaving a toxic relationship, how they wished they could meet a guy like him. He was replying to them, not in a vague thank you kind of way, but with little inside jokes, flirty emojis, things like maybe someday, who knows, life is full of surprises. Every trace of our life together had been scrubbed from that digital version of him. No pictures of me, no mention of me, no hint that he went home to a wife who was probably making dinner while he filmed himself in the car talking about how lonely he was. I just sat there on the couch with the tablet in my lap and my heart pounding so hard it made my hands shake. Our son was in the next room arguing with some cartoon villain on the screen, and my husband was at the store grabbing milk, or at least that is what he had said when he left. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to protect you by going very calm and very blank. Like maybe if I did not think too hard, it would stop feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. Instead of throwing the tablet or calling him screaming, which honestly is what the loud part of my brain wanted, I took a deep breath and told myself to move slowly. I opened the settings and saw that he had saved the password for that app. I took a picture of the login information with my phone, then I logged out and back in to make sure it worked. It did. It was not some old, forgotten account. The last post was from that morning, a video of him in the parking lot at work talking about how he hoped his son would grow up proud of him for never giving up. I wanted to laugh and throw up at the same time. For the next hour, while cartoons played in the background, I scrolled through his posts and watched my marriage crack in slow motion. I saw holidays where he had conveniently cropped me out, turning a family picture into a single dad moment. I saw weekends he had told me he was exhausted and needed to sleep suddenly appear as footage of him driving around the city talking to his followers about growth and healing. I saw comments from strangers calling him brave, and comments from a few familiar faces that made my stomach twist in a different way. A woman from his job. Another woman whose name I recognized from his stories about clients. They were all there, in this secret little world where I was just a vague villain in his backstory. By the time my husband walked back in with grocery bags and that fake casual whistle he does when he wants to act like he is light and easygoing, I had already made a decision. I smiled, I kissed his cheek, I put the milk in the fridge, and I did not say a word. It felt like my tongue had turned into a piece of glass in my mouth. That night, after he fell asleep snoring with his phone on the nightstand, I sat on the bathroom floor with the tablet and my own phone, and I created a new account on that same social media app. I made my fake profile boring on purpose. No photo at first, just a simple username, some neutral posts about work and coffee and being tired all the time. I followed a bunch of random accounts so it would look real enough. Then I followed him. I turned on all the notifications. Every time he posted, every time he replied to someone, every time he went live, my phone would light up. It felt insane, sitting there building a fake digital version of myself to spy on my very real husband. But it also felt like the only way I was going to get the full picture before I decided what to do. Over the next days, my life split in two. There was the version where I packed lunches, dealt with tantrums about socks, went to work, and pretended my husband was just tired when he zoned out on the couch. Then there was the version where I sat in my car in the parking lot on my lunch break, watching videos of him telling strangers that he had rebuilt himself after a brutal breakup, that he was finally learning to love again, that he was scared to trust but wanted to try. He never once mentioned a wife he went home to. He never once mentioned a little boy who still liked to sleep curled up at the edge of our bed. One afternoon, while I was answering messages from patients about prescription refills, his tablet lit up on the counter with a different kind of notification, from a dating app I had never seen before. It said something like, "You have a new match," with a little heart. I stared at it until the screen went dark again, and then I picked it up with hands that suddenly felt heavy. The app was open in the background, logged in and active. His profile picture was him and our son again, but the caption under it made me feel like my lungs had stopped working. Hard-working single father, co-parenting after a difficult breakup, looking for something real. I used an old password of his that I should never have remembered as easily as I did and opened his messages. There they were. Conversations with multiple women, all threaded and overlapping, all following the same script. He would start with something about how he had not dated in a long time because he had been focusing on his son. They would tell him how sweet that was, how rare it was to find a guy who actually cares about his kid. He would send them pictures from the park, from the living room, from our kitchen table, all carefully framed so that I was never in the shot, so that you would think he was doing this completely alone. One woman stood out almost immediately. She messaged him the most, their tone was different, more familiar, full of little callbacks to things they had obviously talked about off the app. According to her profile, she worked in marketing, she liked hiking and baking and some other generic-sounding hobbies, but their conversations were not generic at all. They were sending each other good morning messages, talking about their days, sharing stupid memes. He had told her about his son, about how hard it was being both parents at once. He had never mentioned that the other parent slept down the hall. I started keeping a notebook, which sounds obsessive, and maybe it was, but my brain needed somewhere to dump all the dates and lies. I wrote down the nights he said he had to stay late at work, the weekends he told me he had some training, the times he said he had to help a friend move. Then I cross-checked them with his messages, his posts, and those little location tags he kept forgetting to turn off. More often than not, his version of events and the digital one did not match at all. The first time I saw him make plans with the marketing woman, my hands got cold. He told her he was meeting a client in the city center and suggested they grab coffee after. The date landed on a day he had already told me he might be home late because of a meeting, which felt both careful and lazy at the same time. He really thought I was not paying attention. To be fair, I had not been. Not like this. On the day of the supposed client meeting, I dropped our son off at school, called in a personal day, and parked my car a block away from the coffee shop he had texted her about. I felt ridiculous, like some character in a trashy show. Sitting there in my car with a travel mug that had gone cold, watching strangers walk by and jump every time a man in a baseball cap appeared. I kept telling myself I could still go home, that I did not actually want to see it with my own eyes. But my body stayed glued to the seat. He showed up right on time, which was funny because he was almost never on time for anything at home. He wore the jacket I had given him for our anniversary, the one he had told me was too fancy for his job. He looked lighter somehow, like someone had taken a weight off his shoulders. A few minutes later, she walked up, and my stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with jealousy at first. She looked normal. Not some cartoon villain. Just a woman in jeans and a soft sweater, hair pulled back, nervous smile, holding her phone like a shield. They hugged like people who had been talking for a while. Then they sat down, and my husband laughed in a way I had not heard in months. I watched him lean in, touch her hand, show her something on his phone. I watched her blush, tuck her hair behind her ear, look at him like he was exactly who he said he was. I snapped a few pictures with my phone from the car, my fingers shaking so badly half of them came out blurry. I do not even know why I took them. Proof for myself, maybe. Proof for later. Proof that I was not insane. When he came home that night, he put a small bunch of flowers on the counter and kissed my cheek, saying something about how he had passed a stand on the way back from his meeting and thought of me. Our son came running and yelling about dinosaurs and snacks, and my husband scooped him up, spinning him around like some loving father in one of his own videos. I stood there with my hands still smelling like dish soap and stared at the man who had just spent his afternoon pretending to be single and available. If this is the part where you think I threw the flowers at his head and kicked him out, I am sorry to disappoint you. I did not. I smiled. I put the flowers in a glass. I helped our son build a pillow fort. I went through the motions of our evening routine like I was watching someone else do it from a distance. Inside my chest, something had cracked clean down the middle, but on the outside, I stayed composed because I needed time. I needed to know if this was a horrible, isolated mess, or if my entire life had been quietly rewritten behind my back. The first confrontation did not happen until a few nights later, when the tablet lit up next to him on the couch and he fell asleep before he could clear the notifications. One of them was a message from the marketing woman, popping up across the top of the screen with a little heart next to his name. I took the tablet gently out of his hand and carried it into the kitchen, where I put it down on the table and just stared at it for a minute, breathing in and out until my hands stopped shaking enough to tap the screen. I opened the social media app first. His latest video was him sitting in his car in a parking lot, talking about how he had learned to stop settling for less than he deserved. I did not even finish watching it. Instead, I opened the dating app and scrolled straight to his conversation with the marketing woman. There were messages from earlier that day, him telling her he had an amazing afternoon, that he could not stop thinking about her laugh, that he felt like he could really be himself with her. She had replied with things like, "I am so glad we met, and I have not felt this way in a long time." It was like being punched in the face by a life I did not even know existed. I walked back into the living room, tablet in hand, and turned on the lamp. My husband groaned and blinked up at me, confused. I held the tablet out to him and said his name in a way that made his eyes snap fully open. He saw the screen, saw the messages, and for a second his face went completely blank. Then he sat up, rubbed his face, and did what he always does when he is caught. He tried to laugh it off. "It is not what you think," he said, voice already sliding into that calm tone he uses when he wants me to feel dramatic. I told him I did not say what I thought yet. I just wanted him to explain why there was an entire version of him online pretending to be a single dad, why there were women sending him hearts, why there were messages about afternoon dates when he was supposed to be in a meeting. He started with the easy lie. "Those accounts are old," he said. "I just never deleted them. It is not a big deal." I scrolled to the top and showed him the timestamp from that morning. He frowned, then switched tactics. "It is just for attention," he said. "Everyone does that. It is harmless." When I did not flinch, he sighed like I was exhausting and said, "You should not be going through my stuff. This is a huge invasion of privacy." It was wild, watching him flip the script so fast I almost got whiplash. Suddenly, the conversation was not about him building an entire secret life online. It was about me opening his apps. He told me I was controlling, that I had been distant, that he felt invisible at home, that he just needed somewhere to feel seen. He pulled out every line about how hard it is to be a man and a father and a provider, which was funny because I also work and parent and carry the mental load of our entire household, but sure. I wish I could tell you I stood up, called him out, and walked away right then. Instead, I sat there at the end of the couch, hands clenched together, and listened. I listened to him cry. I listened to him say he was lost. I listened to him swear nothing had ever gotten physical, that it was all just talking, that he never meant to hurt me. He said he would delete everything right then in front of me. He said he would go to therapy. He would do whatever it took. He just did not want to lose his family. The stupid part is that some of what he said hit exactly where my insecurities live. I had been tired and checked out. I had been snappy. I had been putting our son first in every decision and leaving scraps of energy for the marriage. So when he said he felt ignored, a part of me believed it. It did not excuse anything he did, but it made the whole mess feel less black and white, which is how you end up making deals with yourself you swore you would never make. We spent hours that night talking in circles. By the time our son woke up from a bad dream and wandered into the living room half asleep, we had reached a weird, fragile agreement. He would delete the profiles and the apps. We would look for a therapist. We would try to fix things, at least for the sake of our child. I tucked our son back into bed, crawled in next to my husband, and lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself that people mess up and work through it all the time, that maybe this was our horrible low point and we would climb out of it together. If you are rolling your eyes, it is fine. I am rolling my eyes at myself now too. Over the next week, I watched him like a hawk while pretending I was not watching him at all. He did delete a few things in front of me, which he made a whole performance out of. Look, see, it is gone. He left his phone out more, which would have been reassuring if I did not know he could change app names and hide things in folders labeled boring stuff. When he went to take a shower, I checked. Some apps were gone, others had just been moved. One brand new dating app had appeared, tucked away in a folder under a different name, with a freshly made profile and a bunch of matches. When I found yet another new dating app hidden in his phone, I did not even bother with a long argument. I showed him the screenshots. He called me obsessed and said I was ruining the marriage by snooping. And in that moment, something in me finally shifted from hurt into something sharper. That was the night I realized he was not confused or lonely or going through a temporary phase. He had built a system of lies, and I needed to stop waiting for him to suddenly choose honesty. Even knowing what he was doing, part of me still flinched when he called me paranoid, but the screenshots did not lie. So I scanned the receipts for some cheap legal clinic, made an appointment with a family lawyer, and gathered my notebook, my screenshots, my photos, and my spine. I did not tell my husband. I told him I had to stay late at work for inventory, sitting in that small office across from a woman in a blazer who looked like she had seen every shade of human stupidity. I laid out the story as calmly as I could. I told her about the secret profiles, the fake single dad persona, the dates, the lies, the threats to turn everyone against me. She did not tell me I was crazy. She did not tell me I was overreacting. She told me to keep documenting, to stop arguing with him about every single lie, and to think seriously about what I wanted my life to look like in a year, in 5 years, in 10. She explained in simple terms how separation and custody usually work where we live. She talked about things like temporary orders, documentation, patterns of behavior. It was not some complicated drama, just a series of unromantic, practical steps to get out of something that was slowly killing me. While I was quietly lining up information, my husband was busy writing his own script. He started calling his mother more, which is never a good sign for me. He told her I was moody and cold, that I had turned controlling, that I was not the same person she had met. She, of course, called me with her soothing voice and told me she understood that marriage is hard, but men need space, and I should not make a big deal out of silly internet stuff. According to her, all that mattered was that he came home to me every night. He told his friends that I was obsessed with social media, that I was going through his phone constantly, that I was accusing him of things he had never even thought of doing. He left out the part where he had an entire fake life on those apps. Every time someone he had warmed up in advance reached out to me with concern for my mental health, I felt my world get a little smaller. The worst part was finding out he was using our son as bait. On the dating app, his profile was full of pictures of our kid, face front and center, with captions about how his son was his whole world, how he would do anything for him, how he was learning to be both mom and dad. There is a special kind of nausea that comes from seeing your child turned into a prop in a story you did not agree to. By the time I found receipts from restaurants and a hotel tucked into a coat pocket, dated on weekends he had sworn he was out of town for work, my anger had burned past the point of tears. I spread the receipts out on the table, next to my notebook and my screenshots, like some depressing vision board. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist because I realized I did not even know who I was anymore outside of this detective role. I needed someone who was not directly involved to remind me I was not insane for wanting basic honesty. Therapy did not magically fix anything, but it gave me sentences that did not start with, "Maybe I am overreacting." I told the therapist about following him in my car, about reading messages at 2 in the morning, about replaying every conversation in my head looking for clues I had missed. She did not look shocked. She just nodded and said that when your reality keeps getting rewritten in front of you, it is normal to cling to any evidence you can find that proves you are not imagining things. One evening, after yet another tense day of pretending everything was fine in front of our son, I put him to bed and walked straight back into the living room where my husband was scrolling on his phone. I did not bring the tablet this time. I brought the receipts. I laid them out on the coffee table in front of him like a miserable little fan of paper, all with dates and times and totals. His eyes flicked over them and then up to me. He started to open his mouth, probably to tell me they were from some work dinner. Some obligatory thing I just did not remember, but I cut him off. I told him I had talked to a lawyer. I told him I had talked to a therapist. I told him I had seen him with the marketing woman and that I knew about the others. I told him I was done arguing about whether or not my feelings were valid, because the facts were not up for debate anymore. I told him I was going to file for separation and that I wanted to talk about where he was going to live, because he was not going to keep waking up in this house and acting like he had not burned it down. He stared at me like I had suddenly started speaking another language. Then he laughed, short and bitter, and said, "You are not going to do that. You would not survive on your own. You do not have any proof anyone will care about. No one is going to take your side." He always underestimated me when I did not scream. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork and strained silence. He refused to move out, insisting he had as much right to the apartment as I did, which was technically true on the lease and completely false in spirit. We moved around each other like two strangers who accidentally booked the same motel room. He started staying out later, making less effort to hide it, probably hoping I would be the one to snap and leave first. I did not. I slept on the couch more nights than I cared to admit, just to have something solid between my body and his carelessness. When he mentioned casually one morning that he wanted to introduce our son to someone he had been seeing, every muscle in my face tried to rearrange itself into something that would not scare our child. I waited until our son was watching a show in the other room. Then I told him that was not happening without a proper conversation and some kind of guidelines, because I was not about to let my kid be introduced to a revolving door of strangers he picked up from an app. He rolled his eyes and said I was being dramatic, that it was just coffee, that our son needed to see him happy. I called my lawyer the second he left and explained what he had said. She talked me through options for temporary agreements, for documenting concerns, for asking a judge to put some basic structure around his time with our son. It was not some huge courtroom showdown, just a series of forms and a strongly worded request to stop acting like our child was an accessory. When we went to the first mediation session, he walked in with that wounded expression he had perfected, like the world kept doing things to him and he was just bravely enduring it. He told the mediator that he felt controlled, that I was trying to turn our son against him, that I was obsessed with his online activity, that I was making things up. He cried. He talked about how he had always shown up for our son, how he had worked so hard for this family. He made sure to mention that I had gone through his devices, that I had followed him, that I had talked to a lawyer behind his back. Then it was my turn. I did not have a dramatic speech. I had a folder. I handed over printouts of his profiles, screenshots of his posts, copies of messages where he called himself a single dad, schedules showing how his supposed work events lined up perfectly with his dates. I did not even need to say much. The mediator just quietly flipped through the pages while my husband shifted in his chair. The twist I did not see coming showed up in the second mediation session. My lawyer had suggested we reach out to the marketing woman, which I had avoided at first because humiliation has a way of making you want to hide from people who have seen you at your lowest, even if they did not know it. But she ended up agreeing to talk to my lawyer on the phone, and she sent screenshots of their messages. Seeing her words in black and white was the moment it stopped being just my story against his performance. She did not know he was married, not officially. According to her, he had told her he had been divorced for years, that he lived alone, that he only co-parented. She had messages where he described his abusive, controlling ex, about how hard it was to trust again after what he had been through. Those stories were about me. I sat there reading a woman I had never met describe the version of me he had invented, and it felt like being split in half. If this were a neat story, that would have been the moment he broke down and apologized, but real life rarely gives you that kind of satisfaction. He mostly sat there with his jaw clenched while the mediator wrote things down. The official notes did not say that he was a liar, because that is not how these things work, but the pattern was clear. He told different stories to different people to get what he wanted. None of those people were his son. The separation moved forward after that. It was not some triumphant victory dance. It was meetings, signatures, schedules, and way too many calls about who was picking up our son from school on which day. The temporary agreement said our son would live primarily with me and see his father on specific days, with a strict schedule at first and clear rules about not introducing partners to our son without discussion, and not posting his face online. He had to move out. Watching him pack his things into boxes and bags felt like watching a stranger rob a house I used to love. The first night after he left, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. My son fell asleep faster, which I tried not to overanalyze. I walked through each room with that weird feeling you get when someone has been in your space and rearranged things without asking. I found more pieces of his double life tucked into corners. A card from a hotel, a folded note from some woman I did not recognize, an old phone with messages he had never bothered to erase. I put them all in a box and shoved it into the back of a closet. Not because I wanted to hold on to them, but because I wanted to remember what ignoring my instincts had cost me. You would think that once he was out of the house, everything would immediately feel lighter. In some ways it did. There was no more pretending at dinner, no more heavy silence in bed, no more pretending not to see his phone light up and buzz with messages. But there was also the grinding reality of doing mornings and nights alone, explaining to a small child why his father did not live with us anymore, juggling work and school pickups and bills with half the help and twice the strain. I threw myself into routines because routines feel safer than feelings. I took my son to school, went to work, came home, made dinner, did baths, read bedtime stories, collapsed on the couch, and tried not to think about the life my husband was probably broadcasting online as some kind of brave single dad journey. I blocked him on my accounts. Not because I wanted to pretend he did not exist, but because I knew watching his performance would keep me stuck in a loop of rage. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized I had no idea what I actually liked anymore. Most of my choices in the last years had revolved around keeping the peace, keeping the schedule running, keeping him from spiraling into some sulk. So I started small. I signed up for a simple exercise class at the community center down the street because they had free childcare. I started meeting 2 friends after work once a week for coffee. I bought myself a plant even though I was not entirely sure I could keep it alive. At a school event a few months after the separation, I ended up at one of those awkward little tables in the gym where all the parents hover with paper cups of punch. My son was running around with his classmates, and I was doing that thing where you scroll aimlessly on your phone to look busy, when a man next to me made a joke about how these events felt like job fairs for kids. I laughed harder than the joke deserved, mostly because it had been a while since someone said something stupid and harmless to me that was not about custody. He introduced himself as another parent from my son's class, a teacher at one of the nearby schools, someone who was also navigating co-parenting. It was a weird relief to talk to someone who understood the schedule gymnastics and the emotional whiplash without needing the entire backstory. Our conversation stayed safely on the surface that night. Kids, work, the ridiculous amount of fundraising schools do. But when he mentioned he had gone through a messy divorce, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes that made me feel seen in a way I had not expected. I gave him my number mostly so we could coordinate playdates, or that is what I told myself. For a long time, that is all it was. Group hangouts at the park, shared complaints about homework assignments, texts about who could grab which kid on which day when a stomach bug tore through the classroom. There were no late-night heart emojis, no secret profiles, no performances. Just a slow, cautious friendship that made me realize how starved I had been for normal human connection. Meanwhile, my ex did exactly what my therapist had quietly predicted. He jumped headfirst into another relationship. I learned about it the way I seemed to learn about everything, through a trail of digital crumbs and an awkward conversation with my son. After one of his visits, my son came home talking about a new lady who had shown him how to make pancakes in fun shapes. He was confused about who she was. He called her his father's friend, but the way he described the hugs and the way they sat together made it obvious what was really going on. I swallowed my irritation and listened. Then I called my lawyer again. We had agreed that he would not introduce romantic partners to our son without talking to me first. Not because I wanted to control his dating life, but because stability matters when you are 5. He had ignored that completely. My lawyer documented it, sent a polite but firm letter, and the judge added a reminder to our file about following agreements. There were no huge consequences, just another note that he apparently could not follow even basic instructions where our kid was concerned. Through mutual acquaintances, I eventually heard the new woman's version of the story, even though I never sought her out. In her world, I was not in the picture. He told her I had walked away years ago, that he was basically doing this alone, and that he only dealt with me for co-parenting. I wish I were exaggerating. He even showed her pictures of me with our son and framed them as old family photos from before I supposedly left. When I first heard that, I laughed so hard I had to sit down, because it was either laugh or scream. For a brief, petty moment, I wanted to show up at her door with a stack of paperwork and say, "Surprise, I am very much alive." But then I remembered how small and stupid I had felt sitting in that coffee shop watching him laugh with the marketing woman, and I realized I did not owe it to anyone to walk into that kind of scene again. She would find out eventually, the way they all seem to. According to a mutual acquaintance, she did, about 2 months later when she ran into someone who knew the truth. He moved on to the next one within weeks. My job now was not to save his future girlfriends. It was to keep my son and myself as far from his chaos as possible. Time is weird when you are healing from something that was both slow and sudden. Some days I felt fine. I would go hours without thinking about him, immersed in work and school and whatever show my son was making me watch for the 10th time. Other days, something tiny would knock me sideways. A notification on my phone. A man on the street with the same hairstyle. My son asking, out of nowhere, if his dad still loved him. We settled into a new normal eventually. Our son adjusted better than I expected, which does not mean it was easy for him. Just that kids are way more resilient than we give them credit for. He knew which days were dad days and which ones were home days. He stopped waking up in the middle of the night asking where his father was. He started talking more about school projects and less about who was sleeping where. The teacher dad from the school event and I started spending time together outside of kid-related things. It was slow and awkward and sweet in a way that scared me. He knew about my situation from the beginning because I refused to sugarcoat it. I told him I was still untangling myself from someone who had turned lying into a lifestyle. I told him my trust was not a thing I could hand over in one grand gesture anymore. It was something that might show up in tiny installments if I ever felt safe enough. He did not promise to heal me or fix anything. He just kept showing up when he said he would. He answered questions without getting defensive. He left his phone on the table without flipping it face down every time it buzzed. When I told him I was not ready to define anything yet, he said he was fine with that, as long as we were honest about where we both were. Even with someone being that straightforward, my brain still did its old tricks. If he took too long to respond to a message, I would feel my stomach clench. If I saw him talking to another mom at school, I would immediately start building a whole story in my head about how he was probably telling her I was some crazy ex. Therapy helped me untangle what was actually happening from what my nervous system had been trained to expect. The funny thing about real growth is that there is no big soundtrack moment where everything clicks. It is just a series of small choices, like not checking his phone when he goes to the bathroom, like telling him when something makes you feel weird instead of pretending you are fine until you explode, like deciding that if someone ever makes you feel the way your ex did, you will leave before you start collecting screenshots again. One night, after dinner and dishes and a bedtime that took 3 stories and 2 glasses of water, my son curled up next to me on the couch and asked me why his dad tells different stories to different people. He had overheard something at a visit, a joke maybe, and noticed that what his father said to them about our family did not match what he said at home. I took a deep breath and prayed for the right words. I told him that sometimes adults make bad choices because they are scared of looking like the bad guy. I told him that lying might help someone avoid consequences for a while, but it always catches up eventually. I told him that whatever stories his father told other people, what mattered was that he knew I was there, that I was not hiding, that I was not pretending to be someone else. I did not tell him that his father had called me unstable and controlling to half the people we know. I did not tell him that there are women out there who think his father is a hero because he spun them a good story. Kids do not need that burden. They just need adults who actually show up the way they say they will. Eventually, predictably, the relationship my ex had jumped into fell apart. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance who could not resist the urge to pass along the latest update. The woman had found out he was lying. Not just about being divorced, but about a whole list of things. She blocked him on everything. He went right back to the apps, right back to the performances, right back to posting videos about how he could not believe people treated him so badly. When I heard that, I felt this weird mix of pity and relief. Pity, because it must be exhausting to live like that, constantly rewriting your own story and hoping no one compares notes. Relief, because I was so grateful I had finally stepped out of the script he kept handing me. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel revenge. I just felt done. The real turning point for me was not some court date or some dramatic showdown. It was a regular afternoon when my son came home from school sweaty and loud, dropped his backpack in the kitchen, and immediately started telling me about a science project he wanted to build. I realized halfway through his excited ramble that I had not thought about my ex all day. Not once. Not even when I passed a couple arguing in a parking lot, or saw some dad posting about co-parenting on a random feed. My ex had shrunk from being the center of my world to just some guy I used to live with, who now existed mostly in legal documents and pickup schedules. We still have to see each other, of course. Birthdays, school events, the occasional doctor appointment. At one of my son's recent birthday parties, we were both there, standing on opposite sides of a rented room while a bunch of kids ran around screaming with icing on their faces. He made small talk with a few parents, probably telling them some curated version of his life, and I stood with the teacher dad, who handed me a slice of cake and whispered some ridiculous comment that made me snort laugh in front of everyone. There was no dramatic stare down. No speech. Just two people who used to share a bed now sharing responsibilities for a child, and one of them finally understanding she did not have to keep accepting the bare minimum just because she was scared of going alone. I am not going to tell you that leaving fixed everything or that staying would have doomed me forever. I am just going to tell you that the moment you realize someone is more invested in playing a role for strangers than being honest with you in your own kitchen, something has to change. For me, that change looked like a lawyer, a therapist, a lot of nights crying into a pillow so my son would not hear, and eventually, slowly, a life that feels like mine again. I still flinch sometimes when my phone lights up, a little part of my brain bracing for some revelation that will flip my world upside down again. But most of the time now it is just a friend sending a meme, my son asking if he can stay up late, or the teacher dad, checking if I want him to pick up snacks on the way over. My nervous system is still catching up to the reality that not everyone is building a secret stage behind my back. After everything that happened, the part nobody really talks about is how boring the healing actually looks most days. Nobody makes videos about sitting in a waiting room flipping through old magazines because you showed up early to therapy again, or about standing in the grocery aisle arguing with yourself about whether it is worth buying the snack your kid loves when it is not on sale. It is a lot less glamorous than the big blow-ups that got you there in the first place. And maybe that is why it actually works. There was this stretch of months where my life was basically a rotation between my job, my kid, my therapist, and the laundry basket. I would wake up already tired, make breakfast, pack a lunch, do the school drop-off, and then sit in my car for a minute in the parking lot just breathing. Like I had run a marathon before 9 in the morning. At work, I would smile at patients through the phone, put people on hold, help older folks figure out how to schedule follow-up appointments, and then go hide in the break room for 5 minutes to stare at nothing. On paper, that time looks uneventful. No huge explosions, no courtroom drama, no dramatic exits. But that is when I started actually replaying my relationship with my ex, and noticing all the tiny red flags I had folded into cute little origami birds and put on a shelf. The jokes he made in front of friends that stung a little too much. The way he always called me crazy when I had a gut feeling about something. The subtle way he would turn every complaint I had into proof that I was ungrateful. In therapy, we dug through all of that. I would sit there on the couch, picking at a loose thread on the pillow, and say things like, "I know it sounds small, but it really bothered me when he did that." And my therapist would say, "Okay, but what if it is not small when you put it next to all the other things?" She never made me feel silly for being hung up on things that had nothing to do with dating apps or fake profiles. She helped me see that the fake single father act was not some sudden personality change. It was just the loudest version of who he had been for a long time. Outside of that office, I was still dealing with family, which is its own kind of drama. My mother went through phases. At first, she was horrified on my behalf. "How could he do this to you?" she would say, like she had not watched me smooth over his moods for years. Then, when the reality of divorce and custody and separate holidays set in, she shifted into the "why do you have to make everything such a big deal" phase. She would say things like, "Marriages have problems, and maybe if you had been more patient, he would have grown up. There is nothing quite like being cheated on," and then gently blamed for it by someone who used to tell you to never let a man disrespect you. One afternoon, after she made yet another comment about how at least he was a present father and I should think about that before I ruined my son's life, I finally lost it a little. I told her that my son's life was already being ruined slowly by watching his father lie and watching his mother pretend it was fine. I told her I would rather my kid grow up in 2 homes that were honest than one home that looked good on the outside and rotted on the inside. She did not love that conversation. We did not talk for a few weeks after that. Eventually, she called to check on her grandson, and we settled into a more distant rhythm that worked better for both of us. It hurt, but it also gave me some space to realize how often I had accepted other people's comfort over my own safety. I had been so busy trying not to rock the boat that I forgot I knew how to swim. My friends were a mixed bag too. A couple of them stepped up in a way that still makes me emotional if I think about it too long. They watched my son when I had court dates. They brought over food on days when my brain felt like it was full of fog and I could not remember if I had eaten. They listened to me tell the same story 5 different times from 5 different angles without rolling their eyes. They sat on my couch and let me ugly cry and say things like, "What if I never trust anyone again?" And they did not try to fix it. They just stayed. Other people faded out. Some of them had been closer to my ex than to me, which I get, but some of them I had considered my friends. They believed his version of events, the one where I was a jealous, controlling wife who ruined a good thing because I could not handle that other people found him attractive. I heard little pieces of their conversations through the grapevine, and even though I told myself I did not care, every time someone chose his script over my actual life, it felt like getting poked in a fresh bruise. There was one friend in particular who called me one night and basically asked me to explain myself. She said she just wanted to hear both sides, which sounds fair in theory, but there is something about being asked to justify your decision to leave a man who lied to your face that makes you want to hang up. I almost did. Instead, I told her that if she needed a neat story that made my ex look less awful so she could keep inviting him to parties without feeling weird, that was her business. But I was done auditioning for the role of reasonable ex-wife. I was not going to stand in any more living rooms trying to convince a room full of people that my pain was real. I think that was the night I stopped trying to manage everyone's opinions and focused on managing my actual life. Co-parenting stayed messy, because of course it did. My ex would show up late for pickups and act like I was overreacting when I pointed out that our kid had been waiting by the window for half an hour. He would bring our son home loaded up with sugar and new toys like he was trying to win some invisible competition I had never agreed to play. Sometimes he would subtly trash talk me in front of our son, little comments about how strict I was or how I did not know how to relax. I wrote those down too. Not because I planned to shove them in a judge's face, but because seeing patterns on paper helped me trust my perception. There were a few times when I had to remind myself very firmly not to send long, detailed messages to his new girlfriends, whoever they were at the time. I would see some new woman pop up in photos, smiling next to him, and every part of me wanted to pull her aside and say, "Please, look at his search history before you move in. I am begging you." But then I would remember all the times people had tried to warn me about smaller things and I had brushed them off because I loved the guy and I wanted to believe him. People in love do not hear warnings. They hear interference. So instead, I put all of that energy into building something that was not about him. When the teacher dad and I finally had an actual adult conversation about possibly dating, I told him straight up that I did not want to recreate my old life with a nicer face. I did not want to slide into some new routine where I carried the mental load while he played the fun parent. I wanted an actual partner or nothing at all. He did not flinch. He said, "Then hold me to that." And so far, he has meant it. We still move slowly. There are nights when he is over for dinner and my son is halfway in love with him because he helps build ridiculous blanket forts. And I can feel my brain start to panic. Like any minute now, I am going to discover some secret account he has been hiding. On those nights, instead of snooping through his stuff, I tell him exactly what is going through my head. I tell him I am scared of being blindsided again. I tell him I know he is not my ex. But my body sometimes cannot tell the difference. He listens. He does not get defensive. He does not call me crazy. He does not make it about how hard it is for him to be with someone who has trust issues. He just asks what would make me feel safer and then actually does that. It is unsettling in its own way, having someone respond with care when you are braced for mockery. I wish I could say that now my life is perfectly balanced. And I never think about my ex unless a bill shows up with his name on it. But that would be a lie, and I am extremely done with lies. There are still days when I feel rage bubble up out of nowhere. Like when I am filling out school forms and I have to write both our names in those little boxes, and remember how much work I did to keep this family functioning while he was busy recording heartfelt videos in parking lots. Or when my son says something that sounds a little too much like one of his father's lines and I have to unclench every muscle in my jaw before I answer. The difference now is that those feelings do not run my whole day. They show up, I notice them, I talk about them in therapy or with the handful of people I actually trust, and then I go back to packing lunches and answering emails and watching cartoons on the floor. My life is not some powerful before and after montage. It is just a sequence of very human moments where I try, fail, try again, and slowly become less willing to abandon myself for someone else's comfort. If there is any kind of lesson buried in this mess, it is probably something small and unglamorous, like If you feel like you have to build a case file to prove your own reality, something is fundamentally wrong. Or maybe it is just that you are allowed to leave when someone decides that your shared life is less exciting than the version of themselves they can post for strangers. These days, when I see those polished posts from people talking about how they pulled themselves up after a terrible breakup, how they are finally choosing themselves, I feel two things at once. Part of me is genuinely happy for whoever is actually doing the work to heal. The other part of me wonders about the person on the other side of that story, the one doing dishes in some small kitchen trying to untangle what is real from what has been uploaded for likes. I do not think I will ever again be impressed by someone talking about how much they have changed without also watching how they show up in the quiet parts of life. Are they present when no one is filming? Do they tell the same story about you in every room? Do they treat the family right when there is no audience to clap for them? Those are the things that matter, and they never fit neatly into a caption. There was this one afternoon at the school playground that sticks in my mind more than any of the legal meetings. It was one of those community events with tables of cupcakes, kids running in uneven lines, and adults pretending they were not checking their phones every 2 minutes. My son was on the swings with the teacher dad pushing him gently, and I was standing a little off to the side holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, trying not to overthink how weird it still felt to see another grown man step into that space. My ex showed up late, of course. He walked across the grass in that way he has, like the whole world is a hallway, and he owns every door. He gave me this tight little smile, the kind you give a neighbor you barely know, and then went straight to our son and scooped him up like he had not missed half the event. For a second, panic hit me in that old familiar wave, like I should go stand between them and explain again why he could not just rewrite reality whenever he felt like it. But my son wriggled down from his arms on his own and said, "You are late. We already did the games," and then ran back to the swings without waiting for an answer. I do not know why that tiny moment cracked something open in my chest more than any of the dramatic fights. Maybe because it was the first time I saw our kid set a boundary without even realizing that was what he was doing. My ex tried to play it off, made some joke about traffic, looked over at me like he expected me to smooth it over, and I just did not. I shrugged and said, "He is right. You did miss most of it," and then turned back to my very unimpressive coffee. No shouting, no speech, no scene. Just the smallest refusal to rescue him from his own choices. Later that same afternoon, the teacher dad and I ended up sitting on the low stone wall near the parking lot while our kids chased each other in circles. He did not ask for details, but he said something like, "You looked lighter today," and I almost laughed out loud because I did not feel light at all. I felt like someone had taken the heavy backpack I had been carrying for years and quietly removed one book. Still heavy, still there, but just enough lighter that I could notice the difference. That is the kind of progress nobody posts about because it does not photograph well, but it is the only kind that has actually stuck for me. Moments like that are what my life is built of now. Not grand declarations or perfect closure, just a bunch of small choices to let other people carry the weight of their own behavior while I focus on mine. Picking up my son on time, answering emails, saying no when something feels off instead of spending another year trying to be the cool, unbothered wife who can handle anything. It is boring and messy and sometimes unbelievably hard, but it is real. So that is my story. Not because it is rare, but because it is disgustingly common. If you are listening with your own knot in your stomach, wondering if your instincts are right, this is your sign to at least listen to yourself. You deserve a life that does not require constant proof that you are not the problem. These days, when my alarm goes off too early and my son complains about breakfast and my car makes that weird noise again, I drag myself through another very normal day. But it is my day in my actual life, not a polished story for strangers. And for the first time in a long time, that is enough.